there to share the wealth in that regard.
Boston was pushed down, 7 to shoot. Boston methodical, undertake. After they had fallen behind by 6 in the quarter, that's Cydney Coulson as Aliyah Boston has an extended conversation with the officials, and then is gonna get over to Angel Gray. Angel?
Still able to scoop it up and in.
Mitchell with 24 points.
It was all right there for the Indiana Fever. The kind of game that could have been a turning point in a season full of obstacles. The kind of win that players and fans remember years later. From the opening tip, the odds were stacked against them. Their backcourt had been decimated just days earlier in Phoenix, when Cydney Coulson tore her ACL and Arie McDonald fractured a bone in her foot, both season-ending injuries. Caitlin Clark, their biggest playmaker, had already been sidelined since July with a groin injury. In 1 week, Indiana went from having 3 floor generals to none, forcing a roster-wide adjustment that put every player in unfamiliar territory. Kelsey Mitchell, their most dangerous pure scorer, was suddenly running the offense, handling the ball on nearly every possession while still expected to carry the scoring load. Odyssey Sims, signed on an emergency hardship deal, had barely a day to learn the playbook before being thrown into the rotation. The challenge wasn't just tactical, it was mental and physical, demanding constant energy to break traps, absorb contact, and push the pace without the structure they'd relied on all season. Against Dallas, those challenges were on full display. The Wings fed off turnovers, converting 17 Fever giveaways into 27 points. Every pass was a risk, every possession a battle. Yet somehow, Indiana refused to fold. Mitchell attacked relentlessly, hitting big shots despite relentless double teams, and role players stepped up in ways that kept the game alive. Sophie Cunningham poured in 14 points, hit key threes, and played with her trademark fire, diving for loose balls and refusing to back down from contact. Chloe Bibby came off the bench and buried 3 perfect triples in just 12 minutes, stopping Dallas runs in their tracks. Natasha Howard anchored the paint with a double-double and 3 blocks, while Aliyah Boston fought through heavy defense to keep scoring inside. Lexi Hull hounded Paige Buchers on the perimeter, making her work for every touch. By the 4th quarter, the comeback was in full swing. Indiana outscored Dallas 25-4 in the final period, whipping the crowd into a frenzy. Every defensive stop felt like a spark, every basket like a gut punch to the Wings' momentum. Then came the moment, 11.7 seconds left. Fever down by 1, defensive rebound secured. The home fans expected the timeout. The broadcast crew expected the timeout. But Stephanie White, thinking her team could catch Dallas off balance, let them play on. Mitchell dribbled into a tough, contested jumper in transition, missed, and Dallas secured the rebound. Only then did White call timeout, with just 1.7 seconds remaining, far too late to draw up a meaningful play. When the buzzer sounded, the building fell into a stunned silence. This wasn't just about one missed shot. It was about the opportunity that had been built over 40 grueling minutes. Emotions boiled over. Cunningham had to apologize post-game for a heated exchange with referees. Clark, in street clothes, clapped pointedly at an official after the final whistle. Boston stepped in during a tense sideline exchange between White and the refs, her frustration visible. And then came her post-game comment, just 4 words: "We need better focus." It was as much a message to her teammates about execution as it was a veiled nod to the distractions and inconsistencies that plagued the night. For a team sitting 6th in the standings, with the playoff race tightening and only a handful of games left, this loss wasn't just a missed win. It was a reminder that in the WNBA, a season can hinge on a handful of seconds, a single whistle, or one choice not to call timeout. The Fever's fight against Dallas really started days earlier, and it had nothing to do with the scoreboard. In Phoenix, during what should have been just another regular season game, the team's entire backcourt structure collapsed in the span of a few possessions. First came Cydney Coulson, a steady veteran presence, the kind of floor general who knows exactly when to push, when to slow, and how to get everyone in the right spots. She drove hard to the basket, planted, and immediately clutched her left knee. The silence in the arena said it all before the diagnosis even came in: a torn ACL. Her season was over before she could even get off the court under her own power. As the Fever were still trying to mentally process that blow, the unthinkable happened again. Arie McDonald, their energetic backup guard known for her quickness and perimeter defense, went down with a fractured bone in her right foot after a routine play. Another season-ending injury. In the space of minutes, Indiana had lost not 1, but 2 players who controlled the pace, handled the ball under pressure, and served as the connective tissue between the scorers and the rest of the offense. And then there was the third absence hanging over the team like a shadow, Caitlin Clark. She hadn't played since July, sidelined with a groin injury, and though her return was expected before season's end, she wasn't anywhere near ready to suit up. That left the Fever stripped of their entire point guard rotation. No one to comfortably bring the ball up against a press. No one to run the familiar sets with the same timing and rhythm the team had built all year. No one to act as the on-court coach when possessions got messy. It wasn't just a personnel crisis, it was a strategic one. Everything about Indiana's offensive identity was built around having those ball handlers in place, from how they spaced the floor to how they initiated the pick and roll. Without them, the Fever knew they were walking into every game at a disadvantage, especially against aggressive defensive teams like Dallas. It meant that every pass, every inbound, every transition play was suddenly riskier, and there was no time to adjust slowly. They had to tear up parts of the game plan, reshuffle roles, and find someone, anyone, who could shoulder the responsibility of running the show without. By the time they landed back in Indiana, the urgency was already setting in. The Dallas game wasn't going to be a normal matchup. It was going to be a survival test. The Fever were about to find out just how much strain this roster could handle before something snapped. With the Dallas game looming and no true point guard left on the roster, Indiana's front office had no choice but to make a move, and fast. Less than 48 hours after losing Cydney Coulson and Arie McDonald, they signed veteran Odyssey Sims to a hardship contract. On paper, it was the kind of addition that made sense. A 10-year WNBA veteran with playoff experience, known for her toughness, her ability to get to the rim, and her willingness to defend hard. But the reality was far from ideal. Sims had barely a day to meet her new teammates, glance at the playbook, and get a sense of where she fit into the rotations. There was no training camp, no time to build chemistry, and no way to absorb the offensive system in such a short span. She was being dropped into a high-pressure situation with the expectation to immediately contribute, and she knew it. From the moment she checked in for her debut, it was clear she was still figuring things out. 13 minutes on the floor, no points, 2 assists, 1 turnover, and a lot of time spent trying to read the floor rather than reacting instinctively. She had to guess where her new teammates wanted the ball, when they liked to cut, and which actions the coaching staff trusted most in crunch time. Every possession was a crash course in Fever basketball. Sims, to her credit, kept her approach simple: defend, play hard, and follow whatever instruction came from the bench. But one player alone couldn't erase the structural problem Indiana now faced. The coaching staff's only realistic option was to hand the keys of the offense to Kelsey Mitchell. That meant moving her away from her natural role as a scorer who thrives off the ball and forcing her into the lead guard spot. It was a brutal shift in responsibility. Instead of catching in scoring position, she had to initiate possessions from 94 feet, deal with full court pressure, and still find a way to deliver her usual scoring production. The change didn't just alter the X's and O's, it reshaped the physical demands of her game. Handling the ball against aggressive defenses eats away at a player's legs, and for someone who also carries the team's primary scoring burden, that's a dangerous combination. From the outside, it might have looked like a simple lineup tweak, but on the floor, the domino effect was massive. The pace slowed as possessions became harder to initiate. Passing lanes closed faster without the crisp timing of a trained point guard. Turnovers rose, clean looks turned into contested ones, and the margin for error shrank with every trip down the court. This was the situation Indiana carried into the Dallas game. A brand new guard still learning names, their best scorer playing out of position, and an offense that had to survive without the structure it was built on all season. From the opening tip against Dallas, it was clear Kelsey Mitchell wasn't going to get a single easy moment. She had the ball in her hands almost every trip down the floor, tasked with not just finding her own offense but also orchestrating possessions for everyone else. Dallas knew it too. Their defensive game plan was simple: throw bodies at her early, trap her in the backcourt, and force someone else to beat them. Every time she crossed half court, a second defender was waiting, arms wide, trying to cut off passing lanes or force her into rush decisions. For most players, that kind of constant pressure is enough to rattle the rhythm of an entire game. But Mitchell didn't back down. She mixed quick crossovers with sudden pull-ups, used her strength to fight through contact, and kept looking for seams to attack even when the defense swarmed. Her numbers by the end were impressive on paper: 24 points on 7 of 15 shooting, 4 of 7 from deep, plus 6 rebounds. But the stat line didn't capture the grind behind every single bucket. This wasn't the kind of game where she could wait for an open catch-and-shoot 3 or sneak into a driving lane after a teammate collapsed the defense. She was the one initiating every action, bringing the ball up against traps, and still expected to create her own shot when the play broke down. And when the Fever started chipping away at the deficit, she became the engine of their run. In the fourth quarter, with the game hanging in the balance, Mitchell buried a deep three from well beyond the arc, then immediately motioned to her teammates to tighten up defensively. On the very this was the essence of Indiana's fourth-quarter surge, a full-team effort where every player on the floor contributed exactly what the moment demanded. Outscoring Dallas 25-4 in the final frame wasn't about one player going off. It was about all five on the court refusing to let the deficit turn into defeat. For 3 quarters, Indiana had been holding on by their fingertips, but in the fourth, they flipped the game on its head, a 25-4 run that turned what looked like a comfortable Dallas win into a one-possession thriller. Every stop brought the crowd closer to boiling over, every basket cranked the pressure higher on the wings. By the final minute, the Fever had all the momentum, the building was deafening, and the comeback felt inevitable. Then came the sequence that still has fans shaking their heads. With 11.7 seconds left, down by 1, Indiana grabbed a defensive rebound. They had 1 timeout left. The conventional move, the one almost everyone in the arena expected, was for Coach Cydney White to stop play, draw up a final look, and let her team run something they trusted. But White waved them forward, betting that pushing in transition would catch Dallas off guard. Kelsey Mitchell took the ball, crossed half court, and found herself staring at a set defense. The shot clock wasn't a factor, the game clock was, but instead of resetting, Mitchell rose for a tightly contested jumper with defenders closing hard. It clanged off the rim. Dallas snatched the rebound, and only then did White call timeout with just 1.7 seconds left. By that point, there was no real chance to get a clean shot, and the final buzzer sealed an 81-80 loss that had once looked like an improbable win. Afterward, White didn't hide from it. In a rare moment of public self-critique, she admitted, "I probably should have used it at the 3-second mark." That admission cut both ways, honesty that fans could appreciate, but also confirmation that a split-second hesitation might have cost them the game. And because the Fever had worked so hard to claw back, the decision became the focal point of post-game discussion. This wasn't a game they were expected to win. It was one they had earned the right to win, only to see it slip away in the final heartbeat. If the no timeout decision was the first spark of frustration, the officiating poured gasoline on it. This wasn't just the usual grumbling over a missed call or two, it was a series of high-impact moments that directly swung possessions and momentum. The one that stuck in every Fever fan's mind came in the fourth quarter, when Aliyah Boston fought for position under the rim and Dallas's center clearly clamped her arm. Instead of a hold or offensive foul on the defender, the whistle went against Boston. The call was challenged, but after review, it not only stood, it cost Indiana their final challenge and their last time up. Broadcaster Rebecca Lobo openly said she expected the call to be overturned, calling the decision for the Fever. It wasn't just about that one night in Indianapolis, it was about a pattern. This game became a flashpoint because the calls came in the most critical moments, right as Indiana was clawing back into contention. And while the final play will be remembered for the timeout that never came, the officiating left its fingerprints all over the loss, adding another layer to the sting that be why the time the final horn sounded, the scoreboard wasn't the only thing showing the strain. Emotions were written across every player's face. Sophie Cunningham had spent the night throwing herself into every scrap of contact, jawing with defenders, and barking at officials after questionable calls. The boiling point came in the second half when she was shoved by Paige Buchers and reacted instantly, letting out a clear "got 'em it" before walking away. It was raw, unfiltered frustration, the kind that comes when you feel like the fight isn't being called fairly. She later apologized publicly for the outburst, but her competitive fire was part of what kept Indiana alive during the comeback. Aliyah Boston, usually composed, stepped in during a heated sideline exchange between Coach Cydney White and a referee late in the game. She was visibly upset, gesturing and speaking forcefully before Caitlin Clark, still in street clothes as she rehabs her groin injury, put a hand on her coach to calm things down. Boston had been battling through heavy contact all night without getting the whistles she felt she deserved, and that weight finally showed. Clark, for her part, made her presence felt from the bench. After the final buzzer, she clapped deliberately and forcefully in the direction of referee Amy Bonner, a silent protest that spoke volumes. Even from the sidelines, she wasn't willing to let the officiating slide without making her feelings known. Then came Boston's post-game comment. Just 4 words: "We need better focus." It was as economical as it was loaded. For some, it read as a call for her teammates to tighten up execution in key moments. For others, it was a subtle nod to the external chaos, the officiating swings, the missed timeout that threw them off rhythm. Either way, it was a statement from the team's emotional anchor, one that reflected the fine line they're walking between composure and combustion. In a playoff race this tight, keeping that balance might be as important as anything they do on the court. The loss to Dallas wasn't just another mark in the L column. game. It carried weight that rippled through the Fever's entire playoff picture. Dallas entered the night as a bottom-3 team, more likely to be talking about draft positioning than making postseason noise. On paper, this was the kind of matchup Indiana needed to capitalize on, especially at home. Instead, the loss dropped them to 18-15 and pushed them into 6th place in the standings, tightening an already congested race for playoff seeding. With only a handful of games left, every win now carries double the importance, and every slip can mean sliding into a tougher first-round matchup or losing home court advantage entirely. For a team that spent much of the season fighting through adversity, from the loss of Caitlin Clark to the season-ending injuries of Cydney Coulson and Arie McDonald, the resilience they've shown has kept them afloat in the standings. Stephanie White has managed to keep the group competitive despite constantly reshuffling rotations and relying on players to step outside their natural roles. Still, this loss reignited a vocal segment of the fan base calling for her job, frustrated by the late-game execution and the missed opportunity against an opponent they were expected to beat. The reality is more complicated. White has been steering a roster that's been stripped of its primary ball handlers, forcing everyone to adjust on the fly. The Fever have proven they can scrap their way back into games, even against physical teams like Dallas, but they've also shown how thin their margin for error really is. The clock management lapse, the controversial officiating, and the missed chance to pad the win column all feed into the same truth. The next few games could decide whether this team enters the playoffs as a dangerous dark horse or a limping lower seed. And with Caitlin Clark's return still a week-to-week question, the pressure is only going to mount from here. When the Fever walked off the floor after that 81-80 loss, they weren't just leaving behind a winnable game, they were carrying the weight of what it represented. This was a night where they had fought through every disadvantage imaginable, missing their top 3-point guards, integrating a new player with barely a day of preparation, and surviving relentless physical play. They had rallied from 17 points down, outscored Dallas 25-4 in the fourth quarter, and put themselves in position to win despite all of it. And yet, in the final moments, it slipped away, part tactical misstep, part officiating chaos, and part the sheer strain of trying to do too much with too little. For some fans, the focus will stay on the no timeout decision. For others, the spotlight will be on the officiating sequences that tilted the floor at crucial moments. But for the players, especially leaders like Kelsey Mitchell and Aliyah Boston, the takeaway is more personal. They proved they could compete even without their usual anchors. They proved they could dig in and make a game ugly if it meant a chance to win. What they didn't prove, at least not on this night, is that they can close out those wins against teams they should beat. With the standings tightening and the playoffs looming, there's no time to dwell. The Fever's ability to respond to this loss, to turn frustration into focus, will define whether they finish the season as a dangerous underdog or as a team that let opportunity slip away. Caitlin Clark's return is still on the horizon, but until then, this roster will have to find a way to protect its leads, execute in the clutch, and make sure nights like this don't happen again. So, what's your take? Was this game lost because of coaching, officiating, or just the bad luck of a shorthanded roster? And more importantly, do you think the Fever can still make a deep playoff run once Clark is back? Let us know in the comments, like and subscribe for more breakdowns, and turn on notifications so you never miss the moments that could shape the rest of this WNBA season. Losses like this don't just fade into the background. They linger, replaying in the minds of players, coaches, and fans long after the arena has emptied. For the Fever, this wasn't just a game where the scoreboard came up short. It was a collision of every challenge they've faced all season. The missing stars, the mid-season roster shakeup, the grinding physical demands on players like Kelsey Mitchell, the clutch shooting from role players trying to fill impossible gaps, the split-second coaching decision that will be second-guessed until the next tip-off, and the officiating moments that felt like salt in the wound, it all converged in those final seconds against Dallas. But in the bigger picture, games like this can either fracture a team or forge it into something tougher. The Fever have already shown resilience in ways most rosters never have to test, and the lessons from this night are sharper than most. Executing under pressure, staying connected when calls go against you, and closing games with precision are all skills that can turn a playoff run from hopeful to historic. If they can absorb this loss, learn from the chaos, and channel the sting into the next matchup, it might end up becoming a turning point rather than a breaking point. With only a handful of games left, the margin for error is gone. Every possession matters, every decision will be magnified, and every player will be asked to give more than they think they have left. Caitlin Clark's return could change the dynamic, but until then, the Fever will have to prove they can finish the job without her. This Dallas game may feel like a gut punch now, but how they respond will decide if it becomes just another missed chance, or the moment they drew the line and refused to let the season slip away. The Fever's one-point loss loss to Dallas will be remembered less for the number on the scoreboard and more for the storm of circumstances that surrounded it. This was a night where the challenges began long before tip-off. The loss of their top 3-point guards to injury had already forced them into survival mode, reshaping the offense and asking players to take on roles they weren't built for. The emergency signing of Odyssey Sims was a necessary move but came with no time for preparation. Kelsey Mitchell, their pure scorer, had to become the team's primary ball handler overnight, battling traps, doubles, and the physical where that comes with carrying both the scoring and playmaking load. Around her, role players stepped up in ways that were inspiring. Sophie Cunningham's edge and hustle, Chloe Bibby's perfectly timed threes, Natasha Howard's double-double in the paint, and Aliyah Boston's fight through constant contact. But all that effort funneled into a closing stretch that will sting for a long time. The Fever outscored Dallas 25-4 in the fourth quarter, put themselves in perfect position to win, and then saw it slip away on a no-timeout gamble that left them settling for a contested jumper and only 1.7 seconds to work with when the rebound went the other way. Stephanie White's rare public admission that she should have called timeout earlier only amplified the sense of what if, and layered over that was the officiating, calls that went against Boston despite clear contact, flagrant foul inconsistencies, and a level of physicality allowed for Dallas that the Fever felt wasn't reciprocated. By the end, emotions boiled over, from Cunningham's heated exchange to Caitlin Clark's pointed sideline clap to Boston's blunt post-game message. We need better focus. In the standings, this was more than just a loss to a bottom-3 team. It dropped Indiana to 6th place and tightened the playoff race with only a handful of games remaining. It reignited debates about coaching decisions, exposed how thin the margin for error is without their starting backcourt, and underscored the importance of execution in crunch time. Yet, it also showed the team's resilience. They fought back when the game looked lost. They kept competing through every whistle they didn't get, and they nearly pulled off an improbable win despite the odds. Whether this night becomes a turning point or just another missed opportunity will depend entirely on what happens next. If the Fever can channel the sting into sharper execution, stay composed under pressure, and get healthier with Caitlin Clark's return on the horizon, this game might one day be remembered as the moment that forged them for the playoffs. But if the same late-game lapses and frustrations repeat, it will stand as the loss that let a promising season slip one step closer to the edge. For now, all eyes will be on how they respond, because the next time they're in this position, there won't be room for hesitation.